So it's the day before Christmas, and I'm about to bake my panettone. We've experienced an ice storm, so this is a good day to go down and do some baking. Hope you enjoy this. So many of these videos begin with welcome back to the shop. But this is not the shop. This is the kitchen, because we're going to be baking our panettone. This is the follow-up video to the candied citrus peel, which I said I would get to. I'm Mark, and this is incidental information, as if you didn't know. So we're going to be baking our panettone, and we're down in here in the basement kitchen because in our house, one of our family members is gluten intolerant, has celiac disease, which is a lot more than just a sensitivity or an allergy, but I'm not going to get into that. So, aside from the fact that I used to love to bake breads and pastries on a regular basis, which I can no longer do, but we still have the holidays, and now and then we come down here and we will get out our baking board and bake breads and pastries and cakes and pies and what have you, mostly to give away. So today we're going to make the panettone. Now panettone, for those of you who don't know, it's a fairly rich holiday bread, very much like a brioche, an egg bread, a challah bread, something of that nature, and it's flavored with raisins and citrus peel, and it is allowed to rise very, very slowly over a considerable amount of time, and that gives it a certain keeping quality that you would find in sourdough, that it will last a very, very long time, without going bad or getting stale. And that's a wonderful quality in a bread if it's going to be around a long time, but panettone, if it's on our counter for 3 days, it's a lot. It goes. It's delicious. The reason why we bake our own panettone is because the panettone you buy commercially really leaves a lot to be desired. It's probably baked weeks before it's arrives in the store, and it's sometimes can sit on the shelves for quite a period of time, but you'll see it in various stores this time of year. And it's a very light, very airy version of the bread. The bread that we make is a good bit more dense. I suspect it contains a lot more butter and eggs than does the commercial stuff, and the fruit is incomparable. The citrus peel that we make is just not going to be found. Maybe if there's a small bakery in your neighborhood that makes panettone, they will make a better bread. But I don't think it's likely they're going to make the fruit. It's just too labor intensive. But for home, there you go. Okay, so the bread has a ridiculous amount of butter and eggs. It has a stick of butter per. The loaves are about 2 pounds. This is our baking tin. It's a number 10 can. I've just cut all my parchment liners. My recipe makes 6 loaves. They're about 2 pounds apiece, and if they rise the way we like, they just fill this can. So they're about, I guess about 8 or 9 inches high, 6 inches around, almost 6 inches around. And there you go. Over on the other side of the kitchen here, everything in my shop and my basement, including my kitchen, is a little tight. So, over on the other side of our kitchen here, we have our proofing box. like I said, I really like to bake. So I built a proofing box, which is, it has a box down in the bottom with a fan and some heaters, big resistors actually, and rack trays up and down the main body. There's a thermostat up here in top, which I actually took from one of those old oil-filled radiators, electric radiators, and it works quite well for this purpose. I have my little digital thermocouple up here to keep an eye on the temperature. I usually keep it about 85 to 90 degrees. Yeah, we're at 83. Well, I opened the door, so it's dropping. And I have in here my yeast, which I have been proofing. So this is just a simple yeast with a little bit of sugar, just to make sure my yeast is happy and healthy, which it seems to be. I have put together large batches of bread, only to find hours later that they are still dough without any rise. And I've chosen to come in a little tighter on this because, let's face it, you're not here to see me, right? Start by taking the butter and creaming it into the sugar. Now, for those of you who have baked, there's nothing earth-shaking going on here. So we're not going to belabor the point too much about how this is done and why it's done. Okay, this was 80-degree water. I find bringing my butter to 80 degrees is just perfect temperature for working. It doesn't liquefy, but it's about as soft as you can possibly get it. And I usually start off about 85, and I put my butter in there, and it'll drop down to 74, 72. I'll add a little more warm water, and I just keep working it for a while until it stabilizes at some point about 80. And I have a nice soft butter that's easy to work with. If you go 81 degrees, you'll have a mess. So we'll move in a little tighter now. And we're going to be creaming the butter. By the way, if you do have a KitchenAid, I bought one of these blades that has the rubber wiping edge, and I must say they do a very nice job at keeping things from sticking to the sides of the bowl. So that's 5 sticks of butter, 2½ cups of sugar. I believe I have a bearing that needs, a bushing that needs a little oil. Does anybody know any machinists? So we're going to slowly add our sugar to the butter. We can speed this up a little. And there's the half, or the 2½. And that doesn't take long at all. There's our nicely creamed butter. I'm going to add my salt at this time too. 1 teaspoon. Not a very salty bread. And now it's time to add our eggs. Now the eggs have a wonderful emulsifying property. So they should blend into our butter quite nicely. This is 18 egg yolks and the whites of only 6. So 6 whole eggs, 12 egg yolks. It has the consistency of a wet meringue or a whipped cream. That's lovely. Would you look at that? Almost looks like you want to spread it on your breakfast toast. So now I need to add my yeast that's been proofing, the last of my wet ingredients. But before I do that, I want to thicken them up a little bit. I want to bring them up a little bit closer to the consistency of this creamed mixture. So I'm going to add some flour, bring it up to the consistency of maybe a cake batter before I add the yeast in here. So I have my flour here that I weighed out earlier. This is 5½ pounds of flour. I believe that's about 15 cups. I like to go by weight. I found in baking that measuring flour by weight has always been much more reliable for repeatability. You see, this is very lumpy, and I'm breaking one of my own rules here. I tell my boys always add the liquid to the dry, so you have something firm to break the lumps up against. If you add the dry to the liquid, the lumps just sort of float around your spoon or whisk or whatever, and will never get broken up. Sort of like never add acid to water. I'm sorry, never add water to acid. Always dilute your acid by pouring it into the water. But see? More incidental information you didn't need. So we're almost there with our yeast batter. I guess at this point we would technically call this a sponge. Although we're not going to let it rise like you normally let a sponge rise. Technique is very important to me. Almost everything I do, there will be a specific mechanical methodology involved. There'll be some technique involved. And I think this recipe developed from many recipes. One of my favorite Italian pastry chefs. I have several pastry chefs that I really like. One is Friberg, F-R-I-B-E-R-G, and the other one is Nick Malieri. And see if I can spell his name. Nick is M-A-G-L-I-E-R... No. It's like Maglieri. M-A-G-L-I... Anyway, I'll have to put it in the comments below. He's got several books, in fact, that I find very, very good. And they also talk about technique. And he, too, has candied citrus peel and homemade fondant and things like that in his in one of his books, anyway. So this recipe was developed from many sources, some of whom were homespun, people I grew up with, friends of my dad, some of which came from commercially available recipes and cookbooks. And I think it grew to this size because this is the limit of my equipment at home. If I had a 20-quart mixer, I would more than likely be making a 15-loaf batch than a 6. But as you'll see in a moment, this is about all my mixer can handle before I have to go to the hand method on the board. And that's going to be fun. That's a big mess. Okay, let's get this into the cream. Okay, so we've got enough liquid in there now that it really has overcome the egg's ability to emulsify it. So the mixture has broken a little. It's okay, because it's all going to go into the flour just fine. Let me get my baking board over here. Okay, now comes the real fun. We're going to take our creamed liquid ingredients and shortening, and we're going to work in all of this flour. And it takes quite a while for the flour to really absorb all of this fat. It will absorb liquid or water pretty quickly, but it takes a lot longer to absorb quite this amount of fat. And it's just going to be this awful sticky mess for a little while, but it will eventually form a very, very nice dough. So, without further ado, just dump it all up. So much for my calculating measurement. What did I lose? Oh, about a teaspoon. This pastry scraper, by the way, this is a heavy scraper. This is not one of those little wooden handles with a thin piece of sheet metal sticking out of it. This is probably, I haven't measured it, but it's probably about 30 thousandths thick stainless. It really does not want to bend much. It's really the preferred tool for me. I do use a thinner one for pastry, but for bread making I prefer the heavy one. Okay. Lovely. That's about a quarter of what's going to be going into this flour. If you look at the ratio to volume of fat and liquid sugar to flour, you realize why this is going to become quite a mess. Just going to fold it out. Let's see. I'm going to be daring and dump the rest of it right out. The other thing I like about this rubber edge blade is that it can actually use it as a spatula, scraping the bowl. It really is a nice device. Can I plug the product? I just threw away the card today. Let's see. Who makes this? New Metro Design, LLC. It just says, beat a blade. Scrape the bowl while mixing. 1 year guarantee. Well, it's about 2 years old now. But it's held up fine. Okay. Alrighty then. So there are 6 loaves of bread in this pile. Okay, now is as good a time as any to hit you with a little more incidental information. For a brief period of my life, I owned a restaurant. It's something I'd always wanted to do. Many people had encouraged me to do. And it was kind of in my blood, I guess. So I opened a restaurant. And on a couple of occasions, I had some folks in there, and I did little cooking classes. Didn't really go anywhere, but that's neither here nor there. So, and since I was a baking fan, we were doing breads one day, and someone asked, well, how do you know when the dough is right? How do you know, what's the consistency? Because it's one of those feels, it's one of those things that you really got to feel it. And you can watch cooking shows and you can read books. And I was taking a class once, and the chef said, well, the best way I can describe when the dough is just the right consistency is it feels like a firm young breast. Well, I got the idea. It conveyed, you know, we weren't talking about Newton meters or dynes or inch pounds. It has the resiliency of a firm young breast. Okay, gotcha. Good. Anyway, that's about where we're at right now. It's really nice. You see, it's come together. Didn't take too long. And I am going to get my flour dredge out and get a little more flour on this board. Although it doesn't seem to be sticking too badly. But it will when I add the fruit, and that's next. I will be adding the sticky wet fruit to this in just a moment. And yes, we have, I can officially tell you that we have achieved dough. And it's a little wet, a little sticky, but it's a dessert bread, so that's fine. But I can roll it. It's a little sticky, but that's a dough. There you have it. All right, let's get the fruit. So we're going to take this all the way through to the final dough ball stage and put it right into our baking forms for the rise. We're going to do one rise. I used to do more rises, but it makes a lot more work, and I really don't think it made a difference in the product. Well, it did, but it wasn't significant. Not that anybody noticed. And like I said, it doesn't live long enough once it's out of the oven to really matter. Now, that's, yeah, see, that's not really sticking. That's a wonderful ball of dough. Look how clean that board is. Very good. That's all going to change in a second, because here I have 2 cups of raisins and what should be 2 cups of, I'm sorry, a cup and a half of candied fruit. However, I think I have a little more than a cup and a half of candied fruit. I'm feeling generous because even though I went through all of that effort, as you saw in the previous video, to make all that candied fruit, I came down and I moved a bag of raisins in the cupboard and I said, oh, I have more candied fruit. So I figured I'd use that up. And I had a little more than what the recipe calls for, so it's all going to get used here. I rinsed the syrup off of the fruit, the syrup that it's been stored in, and I try to get all the water off, try to get all the syrup out, but it's going to be a little wet. So, here we go. I got orange and lemon here in equal amounts. I don't always. Some years I may be a little sparse on one than the other, but I have plenty of both. See, there's the syrup. I want to keep that syrup in there if I can avoid it. Quite a pile of fruit. Yeah. This doesn't want to go in either. Well, we do our best. Okay, done. The world's largest Hamantaschen. No. It's about to break out the other side any moment. Now, this is not like a cake. This is not a very short dough. But it's short enough that it doesn't upset me to tear it a little bit when I'm doing this mixing. It will form plenty of gluten strands and gas pockets as it rises overnight. And as if this didn't have enough butter in it, it's going to get a liberal brushing of butter over the top so that it doesn't form a skin while it's rising. Traditionally, the panettone is put into the oven and a cross is cut in the top. Just a straight cross. And I'm told that there's religious significance to that. After all, it is a holiday bread found mainly around Christmas. However, I don't care to do that. I find that when you do that to bread, sometimes it's desirable, but often when you do that to bread, it will rise to a much greater amount about that area which it has been relieved by cutting. And I kind of like that elastic gluten skin to form a smooth crust. It holds the dough together and forms a more consistent texture inside. It bothers me when I have a slice of bread and it's light and airy on one end and dense and small celled on the other. To me, that's not the indication of a good product. It may be artisanal, but like I said, for me, technique is important, and some of these little things are important. get this flour under the ball. Get this out of my way. By the way, since I have granite surface plates on my on my kitchen work table, I am working on top of a small freezer, and it's a very nice height, and it's heavy and stable, and it's not going anywhere. I kind of like this. Okay. Now we're actually going to do some kneading. To develop the structure that I want. This is important. And I'm going to do this twice. I'm going to do this en masse in the full ball, and then I'm going to cut it up into 6 smaller balls before I put it into the forms and form them again. So this is where the gluten form and texture comes in. You see it's stretching, not tearing. Enough flour so that it doesn't stick to the table. And this is where, if you really thought you had too much liquid in your dough, you could just work in flour again and again. There have been occasions where I have made much too dry a batch, and I've had to cut the dough up into a million tiny pieces and soak them in water and work that water in. And believe me, that's not fun. That is a big slimy mess. It is much easier. I'm going to get this flour on the bottom. It is much easier to work flour into the dough. Okay. So this is what I like to see. I push in the middle and it moves out in all directions. It's not sticking to the board. I can spin it around. My fruit is well contained. This is going well. This does not always go quite this well. Okay, so now we need to divide this up into six pieces. My IC is 120 degrees better than it does 60, so do that. And there you go. I'll separate these before they heal together. And we'll take our first one. And put the cut edges together. Okay. And I'm going to just stretch one side of it. Just keep rolling it into itself underneath. Make a nice ball. Just keep stretching that. Stretching that one side. Okay. Until I get a nice, what I think looks like a nice, see, I don't want that on top. Those will burn. So
So I'll just keep tucking that under until I get what looks like a nice top skin. And I'm going to put that into one of my forms. So I have parchment on the bottom and all around. And it's about, maybe 1.5 to 2 inches thick in there. And when it's ready to bake, it should be at least 2/3 of the way up. Okay. Let's do another one here. Let's talk a little bit about the baking. These are tin cans. They're just number 10 cans. They're not fancy baking equipment. They're not particularly good at distributing heat. They have sharp corners, which are prone to contributing to burning. So what we do is we bake them on top of a double layer of cookie pans, half sheet pans, so to insulate the bottoms from just a little bit of the heat of the oven. These are baked in a fairly hot oven. Here's another one. Okay, I'll spare you, I'm trying to make the videos a little quicker, I'll spare you the rest of this. I'm going to put the rest of these in their cans. I'm going to put them into my proofing oven overnight. Sometime tomorrow we will bake them, and you'll see what that looks like. I didn't really intend to throw this in here, but I was just cleaning up while my bread is proofing and getting ready to go to bed. So I'm scraping my board. Remember I told you I had a nice heavy scraper. Everything's nice and clean now. So I'm finishing scraping this to put it away. I don't want to wash it. I don't want to soak the fibers in water and raise the grain or do any damage to it. It's well oiled. The oil is right through the wood to the bottom. But I do want to get all the the butter and sugar and flour out of it. Now you see I've been scraping this and it looks very, very clean. As clean as it looks, there's some more. You can see that. This is pretty clean. There's some more. See that little line? Oh, here's some. Here's a lot. It comes out. It comes out from between the fibers somehow. It's in there. So, clean your board. And once I'm all done, I will take a damp paper towel, not wet, just a damp paper towel, and I will go over this just to dissolve whatever little bit of sugar might be left behind. Okay, that's it. That's what I got off the board. See you in the morning. Okay, so here's what our breads look like at about 55 minutes in a 350 oven. We've got an internal temperature of 203, which is just about perfect, right where we want it. 190 to 200 something. For this much butter and egg, a little warmer is okay. Got a nice color. Let's slide it out before they sweat. Slide it out of these tins. See what they look like. Okay, so here's a good one. And you see it's just about filled the can. About, an inch from the top. And we're going to slide it out. Remove our paper. And there you go. A nice loaf of panettone. Yes, if they sweat in the tins, the sidewalls will get very damp, very wet, and they will collapse when you slide them out. And there you go. 6 panettone. They smell delicious. I'm sure they'll taste good. We'll cut one later. I'll show you a slice, what they look like inside. And now I'm going to spend a little bit of the rest of my day making my first attempt at a gluten-free panettone. I may or may not video that, I don't know. I'll post the recipe if it works. And wish you a very Merry Christmas. So here's a shot of the final product. I know this was a long video. I tried to keep it short, but it's my longest edit yet. Hours and hours of footage here. So there's the bread. You can see it has a fairly small crumb, but it is bread. It's not cake, and it was delicious. And Happy New Year.